Hey everybody, James Introcaso here. Before we start the show, I wanted to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Kobold Press. Kobold Press are the consummate sponsors of Don't Split the Podcast Network, and they are incredible. We love them so much. Why? They put out quality third-party gaming products that are play-tested, well-edited, and have amazing professional art. You want to learn about the secrets of elven magic, blast your enemies with battle magic, build cunning mechanical servants with clockwork magic? Of course you do. Who doesn't want to do those things? Come on. The Deep Magic series from Kobold Press has all this and more for 5th edition. Time magic, rune magic, illumination, nearly 20 PDFs with new ones coming out all the time. In this series, you'll find new magic schools, sorceress origins, warlock patrons, feats, spells, magic items, and oh, so much more. Pick up the Deep Magic series for 5th edition at koboldpress.com. That's koboldpress.com. One other thing I wanted to let you know before we start this show is that I, James Introcaso, now have a Patreon. It's linked over in the show notes for this episode over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com, or it's at patreon.com/Introcaso. This is because I've been doing this for 5 years, podcasting and blogging and stuff like that, and people have been asking for a way to give back, so here it is. You can check out all of the tiers. There's a little bit of extra content. There's going to be a monthly Q&A live stream and a survey each month so you can help sort of direct the content direction of this podcast, my blog, and the content you'll see on the Patreon. So it's at patreon.com/Introcaso, or you can check it out over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Thank you so much to everyone who has already donated. And if you can't donate, that's totally fine. I appreciate you listening to this podcast. And if you want to shout us out on social media or give us a share, that means just as much to me. Thank you all so much. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I am talking with Eric Silver of the Join the Party podcast. This is an awesome conversation we have about storytelling in role-playing games through podcasts. We talk about Join the Party a lot. There are a lot of really interesting and unique things Eric and co are doing over at Join the Party. So this is going to be a great conversation. Here is my chat with them. Okay, everybody. I am here with one of the most great podcasters in our field, a giant in the industry, an epic level NPC, if you will. Eric, welcome to Tabletop Babble. Who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Hello, I am Eric Silver. I am the Dungeon Master of Join the Party, a 5th edition live play Dungeons & Dragons game, which I think is the best sounding and most accessible podcast out there.
Ooh, that's a big claim. That's a big claim. And you're coming to my podcast and making the actual play claim. We have some actual plays here, sir, on Don't Split the Podcast Network.
Listen, I totally agree. I think that Dames and Dragons is probably the goofiest and most ridiculous Dungeons and Dragons show out there. I think that Venture Maidens has the DM who's been doing it for the longest time. Whenever I try to explain Celeste to someone else, I'm like, Celeste has been doing this for 12 years, which means she's been doing it for 30 years. And they are definitely the best. I think they're the best streaming show out there.
Excellent. Well, that is high praise, and I agree with you on all counts, sir. On all counts. We're going to talk a lot about Join the Party and what it is you do and everything. But first, I want you to take me all the way back, Eric. All the way back to the first time you laid hands on a tabletop role-playing game. What was the game, and what role did you fill at the table?
Oh, that's great. I think it was like it must have been over 3 years at this point. I don't remember exactly. I had been listening to The Adventure Zone just like constantly, and I knew that I wanted to play D&D. I knew this was something that I loved. I've been super into board games for a very long time. So like, if you can imagine me playing Sentinels of the Multiverse, which is like one of those like closed card games. It's like Magic, but it's set up like superheroes, and they give you a pre-made deck, and then it's like 3 decks against 1 villain deck and 1 environment deck. I used to play like 3 character decks by myself against villains, just like to get myself to fall asleep. So I've been playing board games for an extremely long time. 3 years ago, I think I wanted to play D&D for that badly, and I finally got the chance to do it. Like, a bunch of my friends from college just decided to throw a game together because one of them had experience. So I showed up, and I had read all of the player's guide, and I had read all of the Dungeon Master's guide. And I came up with just this halfling ranger because I thought it was really funny that if you were a halfling, your animal companion could also be your mount if you got like a really big dog. So like, my whole plan was to be a halfling ranger and then just ride a dog in a battle. But of course, the first thing that we did was we were on a boat. And we had to fight like harpies that showed up. And of course, I wasn't high enough level to even have an animal companion. So I'm like, here's my bow. Can I shoot one? Is that fine? I'm going to grab onto this rope. Can I go up in the ship? And it was wild. And it's actually the only time that I've ever used a map when I've been playing. And the first and only time I've ever used minis, because everyone else uses theater of the mind. And I've been playing on a podcast for so long that it just doesn't make any sense.
This is the thing that's fascinating, is you're part of this new generation of Dungeons and Dragons players, right? And that's
D&D,
not
the new class.
Right, exactly. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way at all, right? I love the fact that there are so many new people coming to the hobby, and I love that there are people who are gung-ho and making amazing content sort of from the ground running. Because for me, right, I've been playing since I was 10, which puts that at like 23 years for me playing role-playing games. And so it's always awesome when it's like, oh, here's somebody new and fresh, but they came to it like as an adult and that sort of thing. What was it? So as someone who played board games for a long time, what was it that made you decide, okay, now I want to play D&D? Was it that you had never had the opportunity before? Had you tried before? How did it all, how did that come about, your interest in it getting sparked? Was it by the Adventure Zone?
Yeah, I think it was by the Adventure Zone. I reconnected with some people from college, and they were like, yeah, we played D&D. I reconnected with some people in high school like a little while ago after I started the podcast, and they were like, yeah, we've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for years. We would play in high school. And I'm like, why did no one tell me? It just never came up. And like, I was friends with them. Like, we played video games. We played Halo all of the time with these guys. And I'm like, no one decided to tell me that we were being wizards and stuff. That sounds fun. So yeah, it literally just never came up. And I guess I kind of recognized Dungeons and Dragons, from the Adventure Zone, but I kind of recognized it as a game that was just as much storytelling as it was like rules. And I really bounced really well off of like the game construction and rules of all these different types of board games. So I realized I could combine these two things that I loved so much, which is playing games and telling a story, because I was a creative writing minor in college. I wrote a lot of poetry, and it was something that I always wanted to do. And then later, all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, I guess I'm a dungeon master now. And I've been a dungeon master literally forever since then.
That's a great way to go about things. And so the podcast then, is the podcast kind of one of your first experiences playing in that sense, that like it's part of your 3-year history that you've been playing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess I always felt confident like playing Dungeons and Dragons. I played a few more games here and there, especially with my friend Arthur, who really set me up. I had known them from a while ago, and then I would go over and like Arthur and their partner Deirdre just like have been playing forever, and they're just like, yeah, let's just like all hang out and do it. And it felt really low stress, and I really thanked them for that. And then all of a sudden I got thrown into kind of DMing for a group of my podcast friends. So it was Amanda McLaughlin, who's on the show, and then Julia Schifini, who's popped up before and is also a podcaster with Amanda on her other show. and a bunch of our friends who we now do podcasting for. And I guess I just kind of did it because Julia was like, "Hey, do you just want to do it? I don't have time to work on the DMing." I'm like, "Yeah, I guess I'm doing this." And in like the third session after one of our players canceled, and then I had to like throw a one shot together, and it turned into this like wild thing that a like an entrepreneurial bro showed up at their adventuring camp and wanted them to like consult about his like adventuring startup he was starting. But it turns out that they were doing a focus group, and there was like a one-sided mirror, and there were Kotoa on the other side, and the Kotoa turned like everything they said into a literal demigod who then started eating a bunch of people. So and I threw that together in like 15 minutes because I'm like, okay, this monster sounds dope. That would be weird if this happened. And then by the end of that, I made Julia cry. So I'm like, hey, I might actually be good at this. And I felt really confident in just kind of going forward. So then when we started Join the Party, and we spent a lot of time listening to and thinking about what the best Dungeons and Dragons possible could be, I felt very, very confident in starting the show and making it. Obviously, it's grown and changed and been wonderful now, but I felt very confident knowing that we were going to go in there and I could tell the story that I wanted to, and my players would respond, which I'm so thankful of all that.
So set it up for people who don't know. What is Join the Party? You said it's an actual play podcast, but like more in depth. Tell me more about it. Are you guys playing a campaign? And what makes it one of the best around?
It's true. I realized that I just came from PodCon and I spent so much time giving people like hot takes reviews of my podcast that I think I came in a little hot there, but I can explain.
No, do it. I want the hot takes. This is Tabletop Babble. We come out controversial.
Okay, Join the Party is a 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons podcast. It's a real play podcast. We do a campaign. We're about 41 episodes in, and I think this is the beginning of the 6th arc. So, the dividing our game into chapters. It follows characters who you wouldn't necessarily expect to be the heroes of a story. They all have their own flaws that they get through, and the characters become fleshed out, and you really start to fall in love with them. We have our detective, warforged barbarian, who is Tracy, who has a rage switch on his back that he cannot access from the start. So someone else literally needs to turn his rage on for him. We have Anar Hawthorne, which is our half-elf rogue, who is a teenage assassin who is not very good at killing people. And we have Johnny B. Goodlight, our warlock for a dead god that nobody really acknowledges anymore, the Undying Light, and sells the Undying Light like he is a used car salesman. I truly love our characters so much, and it has really given us a lot of space to play with NPCs, and I feel like our tone is like this middle fantasy, or I call it like pop culture fantasy, that you let the fantasy kind of reflect what is going on in the 21st century, and you can make like dumb jokes about like coffee shops on corners as long as you can like justify it in your fantasy world. Like I said, I feel like we spent a lot of time making this as amazing sounding as possible and as accessible as possible. Brandon Grugel, who plays Tracy, is also our editor and sound designer, and he has spent countless hours editing this so that every episode is a very tight 45, 55 minutes, and he sound designs it so well. I mean, he's a Warforged, so he makes himself sound like a Warforged at all times. He creates
That's awesome.
Our characters sound very distinct. He does this wonderful thing, which I can't believe he thought of, is that, I mean, for all the sound nerds out there, that you can make your sound like it's straightforward, but you can also make it sound like it's a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. So when he has character voices, for all of them, for the players and for the NPCs, they are a little bit to the left so that you know that they're in your ear and they're a little bit different than the players who are straightforward. So we make a very concentrated effort to make this sound like you are experiencing both the game and the story. And he just like sounds design the hell out of it. When talking about accessibility, we mean this from a diversity standpoint, that everyone who has ever wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons can be a part of it, regardless of how they have been excluded from nerd culture in previous era. So I spent a lot of time putting NPCs, characters, situations that break down ideas of sexuality and of fantasy race the drow. We don't have drow because drows are not always bad, and we just don't feel like dealing with like that fantasy construction that's been together since the 1970s. Like that's just not true. And we have a wide range of characters and players from all areas of spectrum and all types of different people. And accessibility, we're talking about people who feel like they can be accepted to Dungeons and Dragons and learn about it. So we have transcripts of every single one of our episodes. We have after parties after each episode, which describe what just happened in the previous episode, and we talk to each other about like what the decisions I made as a DM, the decisions they made as a player, and learning how to play Dungeons and Dragons and like get it, building a gamer community around that. And our first 2 episodes literally teach you how to play Dungeons and Dragons. Like Amanda pops in every once in a while to be like, this is what a check is. This is what a contest is. This is what role playing is. This is how, and we're communicating this by like popping in to action. So they see the example and then Amanda describes it. So we have this beginner track that people can start on.
Wow.
We really, I mean, when I'm saying it, like we put a lot of brain power into thinking about this and really trying to make the best and most accessible Dungeons and Dragons podcast out there.
That's huge. And I think I want to break down a lot of this and get to sort of, you know, the heart of the podcast and what makes Join the Party awesome and that sort of thing. But I also want to talk to you about using other game systems, right? Like many people, when you play D&D, you do not necessarily always play D&D rules as written, right? You're adding your own stuff, you're taking stuff away, you're adjudicating on the fly for the flow of the game and so that everybody has a good time. All of us do it. You also tend to work in stuff from other systems, and I'm wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about how you do that, how you identify systems that you want to work in and that sort of thing. So let's start with that. How do you find new stuff that you want to work into your games, new rules, new that sort of thing?
I mean, honestly, being a part of this RPG community is like, I want as many different things as possible that I think are interesting to be a part of my game. I mean, we're talking about systems, we're talking about different literal RPGs, or bringing in components of board games to make it interesting, or using what Dungeons and Dragons can do to bring in like pop culture. So, for example, I realized that there wasn't a lot of alchemy in Dungeons and Dragons, especially this was like before the Artificer UA came out, and I was like, what is a way for us to make potions? Because I really loved that component in Skyrim that you could just like kind of put components together and make a good or not so good potion out of it. So I turned it into a chopped challenge, like Chopped on the Food Network. And they went into like this alchemist lair, and I'm like, all right, you're gonna roll a d20, and you're gonna roll a d20 twice, and then you're gonna roll a d10. So you're combining these 2 ingredients, and then you're gonna add a modifier to it, and it's gonna create this like wonderful, ridiculous potion, and then it becomes this contest or this conflict between other people, so you can like sabotage the person who is also trying to make a potion at the same time. And then you're going to present it to a judge. So like, how are you going to present it? Are you going to try to like sleight of hand steal an ingredient from somebody else? Are you going to try to swap an ingredient from the alchemist cabinet into something else? So it's like taking ideas that I have from video games and applying D&D to it. I've also been really inspired by a bunch of like a wide range of space RPGs, because I feel like those have very good expendable single-use items that I don't think I've had a chance to use in Dungeons and Dragons. I feel like you get a magic item and then it's like, oh, this is my magic hammer, I'm going to use it forever. But I want to put my players into a place where they feel like they can use an expendable item and it's okay. Like, it's exciting and it's really cool and it changes the whole like tenor of the conversation. But I really want, like, I took like a gravity patch from, I don't remember what the system was, but there was like a gravity patch that you could put on your weapon and it would teleport something like 10 feet in any direction. And I thought that was really interesting, just to like, instead of damaging someone and using just like straight up violence and trying to kill them, you just want to get them away. So it's like, you put the gravity patch like on your hammer and then you hit them with it and then they disappear like 15, 20 feet to your left and like get out of the situation. And then you won't have to like incur an opportunity attack. You can just like go on your way. I've also been really inspired by board games. We're talking about Betrayal on the House of the Hill has really kind of like influenced my DMing. So have you played this game before?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's my favorite board game of all time. Of all time.
Same, absolutely. And I love the expansion, by the way. That you have, if you don't play with the expansion, then you are like losing out because it solves all the game problems.
Oh, Widow's Walk. Widow's
I
Walk.
know.
Yes.
Yeah, I love the dumb waiters. They're my favorite thing. Okay. So, so the idea that for anyone who hasn't played Betrayal before, you're like exploring a mansion and you turn over these pile of cards, which become the rooms of the mansion, and you shuffle the cards every time you play. So you have it's like a procedurally generated haunted mansion that you get every time. And it reminds me that even though I have all this prep, like maybe I have a dungeon, right? And I have 5 rooms, is that if someone decides to circumvent it in a way that I wasn't anticipating, and like, the 5-room dungeon is very quintessential, and you can change it in whichever configuration you want depending on how the arc of the story goes. So I realized that by turning over these room panels, I could still turn over the rooms that I was displaying to my players. Like, they don't know which room is supposed to go when. So it's like if they spend a whole bunch of time talking to, like, falling in love with a skeleton NPC, like, who am I to throw them immediately into a trap? Like, I want that NPC to live, so like I'm gonna put them in the next one, which is like where the monster is, and then I can shift around all of my rooms to make it satisfying for the story. So I feel like I've been inspired in all different ways by doing this on like this weird audio medium. I've been inspired by different games to like really trying to branch out and make the game that I want, and I think that my players want.
That's one thing that I think we should all be doing is, you read and experience more role-playing games, you're able to bring those things to the table then, and you're able to enhance your own game no matter what you're playing with more rules and that sort of thing. And it's usually pretty easy to slide certain systems into others. Sometimes it's not as easy, but you can make certain things work and you can have a great time like that. When you are doing that, are you also thinking about, this will make great podcast? How much of that goes into your prep, right? Versus, this is going to be fun for me and my players. This will be fun to listen to.
First of all, that's an amazing question, and something that anyone who makes a podcast literally needs to understand. I mean, this conversation that we're having, we need to make sure that the third person in the room, the audience, is actually going to enjoy it. So, hi, audience. It's very nice to talk to you. Hello. James and I are looking at you right now. I would say that a lot of that stuff fits really well. I mean, a lot of the stuff that is fun for my players will be fun for the audience. So I was actually going to give you my favorite example of bringing something in. The best thing you can do that will catch your players totally off guard and is super silly is that if you get to a maze, make them roll survival checks. And if they get in the lower third, divide like the D20 into thirds, and then print out a series of mazes, like literal kids' mazes. And if they roll in the lowest third, give them the hardest maze. If they roll in the middle third, give them a medium maze. And if they roll like, let's say, a 16 or above, you can give them like a very easy child's maze. And then put a minute on the clock and tell them to go. And it's like, it reminds the players that you're playing a game, and also it's super funny and people are pissed when they don't know how to do a maze. And I think it has to communicate the fact that the player and the character are one and the same, and I think that's something that really comes across in audio. Like, Brandon did a very good job cutting it down a little bit so you weren't just listening to people swear for a minute. But I thought that it would be funny for me and for the players, and then it would be funny for the listeners. So I would say it's like 70% players, 30% listeners. But when you're playing the game, and then of course we do a lot of post-production, which is all like considering the audience.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. As a podcaster myself, I am often considering, like, is this going to be fun for the audience? Is this going to be interesting for the audience? Especially if you're doing something that ends up being live, right? There's a component there, too, where it's like, well, we don't even have the luxury of editing out a 10-minute, looking up a rule or that sort of thing. You have to really keep pushing forward and keep the story interesting, or that, the typical RPG, let's take 45 minutes to plan the next 5 minutes of gameplay. Like, that is not always a great thing to listen to. It can be, but it isn't always a really great thing to listen to. Hey, everybody, just wanted to take a quick break to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Genuine Fantasy Press. You know who they are. They're an incredible press that is giving away a free version of their new book, The Compendium of Forgotten Secrets Awakening, at genuinefantasypress.com. Now, listen, I sat down with William King, who basically is Genuine Fantasy Press, to talk on the podcast a few episodes back. You should check it out because it is an incredible book he has put out. We're talking 34 new subclasses. It's focused on warlocks, so there's 17 new warlock patrons, each one with its own familiar, over 175 new spells and invocations, 10 new races, and dozens of campaign hooks. Honestly, the free version of this thing is over 100 pages long. It's got full art. It is beautiful. And if you buy the full version, you get even more content. You're definitely going to want to check it out. It's available internationally in hardcover, and it makes a great holiday gift. Genuine Fantasy Press's tagline is inspiring adventure, and they are inspiring a whole lot more than that. They're inspiring changes in the industry, confidence, and William is just a genius. So definitely check it out. The Compendium of Forgotten Secrets Awakening over at genuinefantasypress.com. All right, back to the show. When you were putting together Join the Party and you had this idea of you wanted it to be accessible. You wanted it to be something that people could approach. You know, you, like me, are like a white dude, right? Like we're like, at least from appearance, very typical,
Yes, absolutely, yes.
looking dudes as far as like, this is the RPG audience and has been since RPGs were a thing. So,
or that's what people tell themselves, is that only straight white dudes are allowed to play RPGs.
That's how it has been. And so, without getting too much like, here's two white dudes solving everybody's problems with inclusivity, because that's not a road that I want to go down. But like, what did you do and what steps did you take to get your inclusivity plan? Who did you talk to? How did you form that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think that what you just said is really important, that it's like, we have the expectation that only straight white dudes are allowed to do this thing. I mean, so we always forget that like women were the ones who originally created like the AD&D Ravnica. I think I have that right, but that's something that I remember looking into. And like a lot of women were really important to the design of the original monsters in the original monster manual. So it's like this story that we tell ourselves. But I think that it's tied a lot to what we are doing now. We are creating content. We are creating streams and podcasts and modules you can buy on DM's Guild to hopefully combat all of that.
Gotcha.
So you're totally right. It is so important to me that like Dames and Dragons and Venture Maidens are out there like doing what they're doing, so that there is a wide array of different shows out there. At this point, when people are like, hey, I really love my game, but like I want to record it, what should I do? I'm like, you know what? You should not start another Dungeons and Dragons podcast unless you have a very good reason to do it. Like you better think about this and think about why. So, and this is tied to what I'm about to say. Before we started Join the Party, I listened to so many Dungeons and Dragons shows. James, I don't know if you remember this, but the first time that I met you, I was working at this company that was trying to do like podcast discovery, and I was literally trying to curate Dungeons and Dragons podcasts, trying to figure out what made the best show, how to get people to find more RPG shows, and really kind of surface all that stuff. So I listened to so many shows, so many. And as I got the team together with Amanda, Brandon, and Michael, who are original founders, we realized there were these 4 pillars of mediocre D&D podcasts, which kept a large amount of people from enjoying it and kept a lot of people from sticking around. And the first thing was that a lot of them didn't sound great. Like it was like a microphone was put right in the center of the table and then they just kind of recorded it and you didn't know who was who and all that stuff. So that's one. But the other 3, I think, is tied to what we were talking about. It is nerd-centric, it is joke-centric, and it is male-centric. And male-centric and nerd-centric are tied together, but nerd-centric is that it male-centric, of course, it's like, oh, there's this bawdy woman, and look at her boobs, with an E and a W when you spell it. It's like, I'm going to go harass this barmaiden, and then you go do it. It's like, okay, I mean, that's not good or funny, and it's only good, like, okay. But then, again, you have nerd-centric, so you have to be, not only do you have to be a straight white male, but you have to be a straight white male who lived in, like, a few different places and have a steady diet of a very specific 80s and 90s pop culture. And that's not accessible to very much of anyone. I mean, to this extent that it is, I mean, the range of men and masculine adventurers is very, or masculine nerds is very narrow. I mean, either you have like a Will Wheaton style nerd who is like caustic and charismatic like that, or you have more of a classic nerd who is like very introverted and only talks like once a day in public and doesn't feel comfortable like going outside. So we're talking about, it's very restrictive in all these different ways. And then on top of that, by this being joke centric, it's like the inside jokes that people have with each other, whether they are friends or whether they're only referring to specific pop culture things, then that is exclusive and like doubles down on the nerd centricness of it, is that you're not even talking about the actual story. The story itself gets muddled along the way. So we spent a lot of time thinking about writing this down, doing different pilots, trying to make the best characters that we have to like be a part of this place. And we want it to be accessible in all of these different ways. And when I say mediocre, I don't mean like bad. I think that the majority of shows are like this, and which is why we spent so much time caring about it, to make sure that literally every single person who wanted to listen to a Dungeons and Dragons podcast could. And we cared a whole lot about that.
So one of the things you said earlier was that if someone is interested in creating an actual play podcast, they should have a really good hook because there's so many out there these days. What do you think are some good hooks that either you've heard or you're still looking for in a show?
Oh man, I could just rattle them off. Honestly, when you say hook, I mean it's like even like you maybe do a different RPG system and teach people. Like I would love if someone taught me how to play like White Wolf, like a really old RPG system, or like maybe you do want like AD&D and you teach people like how to do that, or maybe you teach someone an RPG system that people don't really know, like maybe Monster of the Week or Kids on Bikes, which would be amazing, and then you would be set like outside of the usual fantasy genre. Let's see, another thing is like your cast is different. So like what if you had like an all neurotypical cast and that was like a thing that you guys tackled, or like all of you were trans, or all of you were like a mix of different people that usually don't get a chance to do something that's high fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons-esque. I mean, let's say you had a different hook. I mean, you were doing a totally different, you were using D&D, but you reskinned everything to be a different genre. I mean, fifth edition is so flexible. So you can do a Western, you could do a modern day, you can do post-apocalyptic, you could do so many different things with it that I would be so excited about. If you really like thought it was going to sound incredibly cinematic and you had all of this equipment and all of this money behind it, you could absolutely do like an extremely good sounding D&D podcast. There are just so many different ways to take it, and I would love to listen to every single one of them. But like, I just want an opportunity for people to break through because they're doing something that's new and original and needs that representation. It's really exciting for me, and like we spent all this pre-production trying to make the best thing possible. I'm trying. I want to do my best here.
I think that's great. And I think you do care about the community and it shows. And your podcast is, becoming a pillar stone of the community. And so it's really great to have you on to talk about podcasting and how you do it and the different approaches that people can take, because I do think this is a topic that interests a lot of people, right? Like, I think people want to know what goes on in the podcasting world, how much work goes into creating an RPG podcast and that sort of thing. And I can talk about it till I'm blue in the face, but it's nice to hear other people talk about it as well. For Join the Party, what are some of your favorite moments that have happened during the podcast?
Oh man, that's we've gotten, I mean, we're already on episode 40 something, so I always try to think of episodes from the beginning that surprised me. One of my favorite moments was them meeting what turned into one of my favorite NPCs, who was Stoneface. So in episode 3, our friend, this is like after like the tutorial episode, so this is like our first one kind of riding without rails that like we didn't do a few times doing pilots. They realized they were locked in a room in this castle that they had just been hired to be like a security team for that royal wedding. And they were locked. They checked the door and it was locked, and they looked around, and the first thing they said was, "Oh, I know. Let's jump out the window." So they're like 30 feet off the ground, and they like tie all of these sheets together, and they try to jump out of this window. And then I'm like, oh no, I need to rearrange my rooms. So they jump down, and then their characters end up in this rookery and is guarded by this gargoyle who sounds like Danny Zuko. And originally,
like
I
all
had named him.
gargoyles
Yeah,
do,
exactly.
yes.
You know, as you do. And originally, I had named him Hugo after Victor Hugo and after the Hunchback of Notre Dame gargoyles. But I was so like flustered by the fact that we were recording without rails. When they asked him what his name was, I'm like, oh, hey, my name's Stoneface. And he just became this like ridiculous guy who would just like fly around and not necessarily be helpful, but just like be this like 1950s man who always had like sandwiches on him. And
Wow.
It really felt like the story was blossoming in a way that I was always excited about. And like the joy of Dungeons and Dragons is that things happen that you don't anticipate. And my players were like, also laughed at this thing that I thought was funny, which was a gargoyle who had a 1950s Danny Zuko sort of voice. And this is where I felt like the show was off and running. That's one of my favorite moments.
That's really, really cool. Well, I mean, it is a great show. People should definitely go ahead and check out Join the Party. If people want to check out your show, where should they go and what should they do?
Well, you can find us on social media at Join the Party Pod. We're Join the Party Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I run the Twitter, so you should definitely hang out there. Or you can find us on anywhere you find your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple, Pocket Casts, Spreaker. I don't know. I don't remember all the apps that people go to.
All places where podcasts are typically found. You can find Join the Party.
And we also have our website where we keep everyone up to date. And we have all these things that I talked about. Again, every single episode has transcripts. So you can go to jointhepartypod.com.
And if people want to know more about you, where should they go and what should they do?
I'm mostly hanging around on Twitter. You can find me at El Silvero. That is EL_SILVERO. That is my name if I was a Lucha Libre wrestler.
Eric, thank you so much for joining us. I super appreciate it. Thank you for giving me your luchador name. And hopefully we can bring you back and talk about more fun RPG stuff if you're down.
I would love to. You know, I've been listening to these shows for a really long time. And like, I feel like I've known about you guys for such a long time that being a part of Tabletop Babble is like kind of it's kind of a dream come true for me. It's very exciting.
Well, that was a great chat with Eric Silver. Thank you so much to him for joining me. You're definitely going to want to check out Join the Party. And speaking of checking things out, I wanted to let you know that I've started a Patreon. I said this at the beginning of the show, so I'll keep it brief here. If you go to patreon.com/Intracasso, you can see all of the different ways you can support me financially. There's a $1 tier, a $5 tier, and a $10 tier. Get Q&As, little extra content, little survey to help me know which stuff you want to hear from me and guests on this podcast and on my blog and other stuff. So go check it out at patreon.com/Intracasso. Also, if you want to help support the show and you don't have the cash, that's totally fine. One great way you can do that is head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. Seriously, even if you are not using iTunes to listen to this podcast, I've said it before, I'll say it again, odds are your podcatcher app uses the iTunes algorithms to rate and recommend podcasts to others. So go create a free account, rate us, rate all the podcasts you love. We will really appreciate it. And if you leave us a 5-star review, I will read it out loud on the show. Credit you. You can make me say anything you want, like S. Jack Sack, who left a review entitled So Much Inspiration. S. Jack Sack says, I listen to this podcast and am consistently inspired by James and his guests. I have found ways to infuse my games with mechanics and techniques to engage my players. Thanks for the inspiration. I do miss the reasons that RPGs are like sex, though. They always made me smile. You know, thank you so much for this review, S. Jack Sack. I ran out of reasons, I guess. We did a whole autofill Twitter thread that people should check out. If you follow Tabletop Babble on Twitter at Tabletop Babble, you can go check that thread out. It was very, very funny. Teenager me thought it was hilarious. So go check that out over at Tabletop Babble on Twitter. All right, people, if you want to follow me, I'm on Twitter at JamesIntroCasso, and you can follow my blog, worldbuilderblog.com, where we're posting all kinds of goodies about the game design stuff that I'm doing and GM tips and all that good stuff. So go check it out over there. And also check out my podcast, The Demon Plague, which is also on Don't Split the Podcast Network over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. It's an actual play that I GM. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget, RPGs are like sex. All right, people, just wanted to take one more break here in the post-roll to let you know one more time about Genuine Fantasy Press. Genuine Fantasy Press, incredible people over at genuinefantasypress.com. And by people, I mean mostly William King. It is his company, and he is making amazing, amazing products for 5th edition D&D. Like the Compendium of Forgotten Secrets Awakening, you can get a free version of this book. It's 125 pages containing 34 new subclasses, 17 new Warlock patrons and familiars, over 175 new spells and invocations, 10 new races, and dozens of campaign hooks. The full version has 190 pages of new content. The book is designed to work with both classic and homebrew settings and gives you new ideas for your world and game. It's got beautiful full-color artwork. It is one of the most beautiful books I've ever seen. Hat off to William King. And it is available internationally in hardcover on Amazon. Now, you need this. If you love Warlocks, you should definitely check out this supplement. If you don't love Warlocks, you should check out this supplement because it will make you love Warlocks. There is so much awesome stuff here, and you get so much of it for free. This is really a steal. So definitely go check it out. It is so, so cool, and you get such a good 125 pages of content. Come on. That's more than preview. That's a product and a half. It's 3 products. It's crazy. Go check it out at genuinefantasypress.com. Genuine Fantasy Press, inspiring adventure.